Welcome everybody to the final session of the second last day of our First Thought series at the Galway International Arts Festival, and we are delighted with the level of engagement and the size of the audiences we've had in these 3 days. One more day tomorrow with some wonderful stuff on the programme. Take a look at it and see if you'd like to come. So our title tonight, we're broadly looking at the issue of borders as the theme for this year's festival, and we've broadened that out to mean all kinds of things like mental illness and transgender issues and all of that, but this is straight back to the business of trying to cross borders, in this case the Mediterranean Sea, which has become a very perilous highway for people trying to escape violence, persecution and poverty. Many have drowned as they find themselves at the mercy of unscrupulous and greedy people traffickers who have no compunction with dangerously overloading flimsy, often damaged rafts and boats. And dreadful news yesterday, 160 people drowned in the Mediterranean, leaving Libya. The Irish Navy has been central to the rescue of these desperate people, and the men and women who sail in our vessels have been responsible for saving thousands of them. The documentary The Crossing, which was shown on RTÉ some years ago, provides a vivid account of what they do, how they do it, and what effects this often harrowing work has on the crews. We're delighted to welcome some of them here today: Commander Tony Geraghty, Petty Officer Tricia Sullivan, Seaman Ian Trimble, and Sick Berth Attendant Sean Doyle. Our moderator for this event will be Judy Murphy, who's Assistant Editor of the Connacht and Galway City Tribune. Before joining the Tribune in the early 2000s, she worked as a freelance journalist and arts reviewer, contributing to media organisations including RTÉ and TG Cahir, the Irish Times, the Irish Examiner, the Irish Independent and the Sunday Times. Special areas of interest are the arts, which she covers for the Tribune. We're very used to Judy covering the Arts Festival here with great levels of expertise and information. And politics, about which she says she's very close to despair right now, and who can blame her? When we look both across the Irish Sea and across the Atlantic in either direction, the prospect is not good. She's originally from County Clare, as was my dad, and she's lived in Galway since the 1980s, having fallen in love with the place when she first came here as a student to NUIG. So we're going to begin with a clip from The Crossing, the first 5 minutes of it, to give you an idea of what it is like if you haven't seen it. And you can find it on YouTube and watch it in full if you wish to. And then Commander Tony Geraghty is going to take over and do a PowerPoint presentation. And after that, Judy will take over. So welcome all our guests in their beautiful uniforms.
Vessels of this nature would only be really fitted out to fit about 30 to 40 people safely.
We need everybody to put jackets on now. 4 children.
We all started praying and crying.
With unprecedented access, we go on board the LÉ Samuel Beckett as the crew fight to save lives.
What about all the vessels that haven't been found? Imagine all the people that are lying at the bottom of the seabed.
Well, it is a stark reality of the situation.
Hi everyone, my name is Commander Tony Geraghty. And I'll just be honest at the start, I feel a slight bit of a fraud here today because whilst I was in the Mediterranean, it wasn't with the group of people you have in front of you there now. So just to prove they were all there, there's Trish there, there's Ian there, and there's Sean there. And that's taken alongside Malta in 2016 during their trip. I was there with Trish in 2015, but not the particular trip that you've just seen excerpts from there. So what I'd like to do maybe is just to kind of give you an overall idea of who we are in the Defence Forces, why we were there, and obviously what we were doing, but slightly less of the video and more of the maybe some of the services we provided. So I suppose the first thing is, who are we? Constitution of Ireland, okay, little known document, but the Constitution of Ireland vests in it the right to raise and maintain military forces. And that the right for that with the Oireachtas. So that's the sort of foundation for us, legal foundation for the Defence Forces. And the next thing is the Defence Act, which is important later on. And the Defence Act then effectively is the legislation upon which everything we do is based on, and the legislation that controls us. So from that, what effectively comes out are the Defence Forces, and the people you'd be familiar with. Top left is the army, that's them in Chad. Bottom left is the Air Corps on a maritime patrol, and our personal favourite on the right-hand side, top and bottom, is the Naval Service. So I suppose the next thing is what kicked off the whole thing and why were we there? In April 2015, a very large timber barge capsized in the Mediterranean, and there were about 800 people lost that day. And the Italian authorities came across it, came across multiple bodies in the water. I think they recovered about 50 people in total, but the remaining 750-ish, it's hard to know, because obviously there isn't a manifest. They all died. And then very quickly, the heads of European states came together, and they met in Brussels. And effectively then, 4 weeks later, Ireland had a ship in the Mediterranean, and the first ship to go down there was the LÉ. But again, it's sort of complicated. You can't just deploy military forces around the world, because that's called declaring war on people or invasions or coups. So we go back to the Defence Act again, and there's a little-known act in that, Section 348, which allows the Irish government to deploy military forces globally if it's on the basis of a humanitarian act. So whilst you'd be familiar with the Irish military forces having to go to various countries under a UN Security Council resolution and then the triple lock, for humanitarian operations only, there's no requirement for them, and a lot of countries would have that in their own legislation. So just kind of migrant routes in general, that's the Mediterranean. You can see there, if you're working west, the West African up through Spain, there was about 8,000 people, I think, so far this year have made a crossing across there. If you go all the way east through Turkey, Istanbul, Greece, you might be familiar with that very unpleasant picture of that child that was drowned on the beach, face down the beach. He did the crossing over by Greece. And the circle area is effectively where our operations were. So just to sort of roll that on a small bit, Libya, Malta, Italy, and again there, that circle there was initially where we started off. And I suppose what's important to understand at this stage is that we were effectively there in sort of two ways. We were there from Operation Pontus, which was when most of the humanitarian operations occurred. And then later on in 2017, we transitioned into an EU mission that was EU NAVFOR Mediterranean under Operation Sophia. And we transitioned to that operation, and that effectively brought us into those areas there. So we started off in Q1 of 2015, and we transitioned to EU NAVFOR Med at the end of 2017. And I suppose the difference there was that Operation Pontus was purely humanitarian search and rescue operations, where EU NAVFOR Med was a military operation. Pontus effectively was to address the symptoms, which were huge numbers of people drowning on a daily basis in really what I think could only be described in those days as biblical terms. And then we transitioned into EU NAVFOR Mediterranean, which is more a military mission to try and disrupt the smugglers and to effectively prevent people from putting to sea in the first place, to prevent them from drowning. In all our deployments down there, there was 11 ships. So that picture you saw earlier on of a ship's company, that was one group of people together for a 3 or 4 month period, and effectively 11 such groups went down. So for instance, I was down there once, Trish was down twice, Ian was there once, and Sean was there once as well. So I suppose between that group anyway, you've effectively got nearly a year's experience down there. So hopefully for the Q&A later on, some of that will be able to come out. We had about 40 medics had to go, and that becomes important, obviously, from Sean's point of view as a medic down there, because a lot of the services you're providing, you're initially trying to provide first aid for people, stabilise them if needs be, resuscitate them in worst case scenario, and then look after them. So from a medic's point of view, it was hugely important, and organically within the service, we wouldn't have the capacity to provide 40 medics over that period of time. So we relied on the Army and the Air Corps to a degree. For the mission I was on with Trish, we had an Air Corps guy and a soldier, and I think you guys then for the second time. Who'd you have, Sean?
We had 2 Navy, 1 Army.
Yeah. So it's kind of a large tri-service effort. And then effectively rescued people were brought to Italy. So just the LÉ Samuel Beckett there, just a small bit on it, 90-metre ship, 14-metre beam, 4.2-metre draft, about 2,200 tonnes, crew of about 57. Normally for home water operations, you're talking early 40s, but for that kind of mission, you need to augment. You need a lot of technical people, a lot of maintenance. Trish, when she isn't looking after her new baby, is an electrical artificer on board. So she can do everything from change a socket to fix a gyroscopic compass to maintain an engine system. So that's the kind of level of technical people there. Medics like Sean, we need a lot more people like him. We normally only have 1. Divers, Ian, and then from a catering and logistics people as well. Ship does about 23 knots with endurance of 8,000 miles. Logistically self-sustainable. But the most important thing is a home. Okay? So if you can imagine not being able to leave effectively for long periods of time, your own home, that's effectively the home for us and for people when they're deployed to sea. So every morning for 3 or 4 months, you wake up in the same bed, you open the porthole, you see the sea, and you see the same view. We always get asked as well what kind of boats they're in. You saw them there, and you saw in a situation like that, those people have life jackets on. Bearing in mind, they have life jackets because we gave them to them when we arrived. When they left, they wouldn't have had them. And obviously things go wrong sometimes, as you saw there, when those ribs, those rubber boats puncture very, very easily, people moving around in them, and you end up with the sea, with what's been described to me as being awash with people. And the next illustration might give a better idea of that. You also have these timber barges, horrible things. Normally converted fishing vessels would have anything from 250 to 800 on board. Half of those numbers are down below in a converted fishing hold that has been locked when the people get into it. Okay? And when that goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. Okay? And a situation like that, that barge got, from a stability point of view, things went wrong for that boat. That's not our pictures, that's from the Spanish Navy when they were deployed. Boat starts to roll, people on deck get washed into the water, and the people down below, they're all dead. So if that barge there had 400 people in it, you suddenly have 200 people in the water straight away. Remember, with all of these boats, okay, they leave a beach or they leave wherever they're going. They have no life jackets, they have no flares, they have very little water, they have no safety equipment. They probably have some kind of a sat phone that has one number put in it, and that number is generally for the rescue services in normally the Italian Marine Rescue Coordination Centre. From the moment those boats leave a beach, okay, those people are in mortal danger. They probably do not realise it, but that is the reality. So whatever hardship they've endured the previous 3 months to get them to where they are, it is about to get a whole lot worse. Trish and I were very lucky. For our trip in 2015, we didn't have any fatalities. But the guys, when they went down in 2016, as you can see, things didn't go quite according to plan, unfortunately, that time. So then, I suppose, once we do rescue people, or when we did rescue people, because we're not there anymore, when they were brought on board the ship, effectively, the medics took over at that stage and had a really difficult job. Would have had to look after anything from 150 to 750 people for a period of 24 to 48 hours. So the medics did a really, really good job. So I have a couple of pictures here of some of the stuff they're doing, and you can kind of see the conditions on board the ship as well. So that lady there would have had an incident with her feet. A lot of problems as well. A lot of things that happen to people are chemical burns, and effectively, why is that happening? Those rubber boats predominantly have petrol engines on board, and they might have a spare canister of petrol or two. That leaks, that sloshes around the bottom of the boat. It gets mixed up with whatever other fluids are there, and people are sitting in it. For the women in the audience, sorry to be so brutal, but you're sitting in it. directly, and you can imagine that leads on to very unpleasant things. So it can be very difficult. But it's not just adults you're dealing with, you're also dealing with children as well. And children needing sus or needing some kind of care and attention. So you can see there as well the sort of conditions that the guys are having to work on deck. And all those rescued people are always maintained on deck for the period of time. Again, getting some sus there. Again, that child getting worked on. Another lady there. Another man there. You can see his hands and you can see his face. Okay, so he's obviously in a bit of trouble. Move on there. And there's some more work being done to him. The next picture now, in fact, is of all the pictures I've seen for the Mediterranean, that's actually my favourite picture. And the reason it's my favourite picture is because for me personally, it shows how well our own people did down there and how well the people to my left did down there. Because you can see that lady's face and she's smiling. So unlike maybe if there's any consultants in the room and people say you have a bad bedside manner, the man in that picture doesn't, okay? Because he's obviously made her smile, okay? And he's working with her and he's looking after her and he's able to build a relationship with her. But that's not the big picture. The big picture is he's looking out for the right side of his face and he's seeing another barge with another 300 or 400 people on it. He's probably been up since 4 in the morning, 3:30, 4, 5. We got calls at all hours of the day and night. You know, that could be 8 in the morning or it could be 6 in the afternoon. But it doesn't matter to him because he's still able to build a relationship with that lady and he's still able to look after her in the knowledge that it's only going to get worse for him. And I think that's an indication of the how good the people on stage to my left are. We often get asked what kind of medical services do we have to provide to people, and that's a kind of a list there in general terms. Mostly it was dehydration, mostly exhaustion, chemical burns. So that's a kind of a balance of issues we treated and then declared issues as well. I suppose the thing to bear in mind is that when they came on board, our job was effectively to stabilise them and make sure whatever was wrong with them didn't get any worse, because we would then be handing them over to effectively the equivalent of the HSE, I suppose, so to speak, when we got into Italy. So our operations effectively were from 2015 to 2018. During that time, we had 119 search and rescue events. There was 110 platforms encountered. There was just under 18,000 people rescued. If you think about it, the Titanic, there have been multiple films made of it. We all think about the Titanic as being a massive casualty event, but there was only 700 people died from the Titanic. Okay? But 14,500 males, just under 3,000 females, just under 800 children. 86 bodies, though, unfortunately, were recovered. And they had their fair share of them for that trip. And the good news, there was 2 babies delivered on our ships, which always brought happiness in sometimes what can be a difficult situation. So my final slide is effectively just a thought for you while maybe we're having a talk on the stage. And thanks very much for your time.
I don't know if people remember the crossing or have seen the crossing, but I was watching it again recently just in terms of chatting with these wonderful people. And there was one scene, there were many, many scenes, and many scenes that were very, very upsetting, and many scenes that were, you're just in awe of this group of people. But there was one particular where there was a little girl, and she was crying and crying, and she was really upset, and she wouldn't do anything. Nobody could get any good of her until a jar of Nutella was produced. And I just thought, like, it's the commonality of us all and someone made that point on the documentary that, you know, jar of Nutella couldn't kind of solve everyone's problems, whatever age or whatever nationality you are. But it was just, I mean, the film really is I suppose it's a microcosm and a glimpse into the work that she did there. And it's truly it's breathtaking and it's horrendous. But it's wonderful because he saved so many lives and I suppose helped so many people and gave value to lives that had no value in a lot of ways until encountering E. But to know you're going on a mission like this and then to actually sort of think of what's ahead and then to be in the middle of it, how does that, what's the difference between what you think it will be and the reality of what it will be? And I'll fire it out generally and you can...
Well, I suppose we had a few ships that went down before us, so technically and logistically we kind of had a fair idea how to train, but I don't think anything really prepared us for the actual emotional and the physicality of the actual mission. As I said, I went down with Tony in 2015 and we didn't have as many casualties. It was that little bit quieter, but in 2016 it was a totally different trip, and what I learned in 2015 was nothing compared to what I went through and what I learned in 2016. It was a totally different trip altogether.
Much harder?
Absolutely, yeah, much harder, yeah. Right. More physical, a lot more casualties. Definitely seen a lot of things that you wouldn't want to see or you wouldn't want anyone else to see. So there's nothing that can prepare you for that. But I suppose what helped me was these boys here, just sitting down having a cup of tea in the evening with them, maybe when things are settled down, have a conversation, said, you know, this is what I seen today, or are you all right? And do you want a biscuit? Do you have anything stashed in your locker? Yeah. So to be fair, without people on board, your brothers, your sisters, and we wouldn't have gotten through it without them, to be honest. Right. That's what helped me through the 4 months down there.
You kind of said that as well, didn't you?
Yeah, it's the exact same. You go into the mess at the end of the night, sit down, have a cup of tea and a couple of biscuits, and you just bounce off each other. It's all laughable, and nobody really talks about what happened in the day. But it's the same as any other day. You just slag each other, but you know, if anybody wants to have a chat or anybody wants to have a talk or anyone's a bit upset, there's no problem. You throw it on the table and there's no judgment. Like, I've made some serious friends on that trip that I'll stay friends with for a long time.
Yeah, and same, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, preparing going down, you're more concentrated, especially medics-wise, on do you have enough equipment, is everything certified, is everything in date, do you have enough drugs, and where are you going to set up? And then you get down and you realise that although it did matter, it's not the big picture, because everything just goes out the window. It's just, you have to do what you can do at the time. And that's, like Trish said, you definitely can't prepare for it. There's nothing that, no course they could send you on, or no training they could give you that could prepare you mentally for it. Physically and like logistically wise, you can prepare perfectly for it. But emotionally wise, there's nothing that can prepare you for, especially for everything you're going to see. Because we would have talked to our colleagues before they went down on the previous trips. Although there was bad trips, I don't think up till that point there had been quite the quantity of either casualties or fatalities or just sheer numbers that we encountered.
Yeah, because there's a scene where one of the guys told, I think there's 120 people rescued, and 8 out of the 120 died or didn't make it. And the upset and the distraught face of that man just told, like what was saved and what was drowned, and the loss, and the sadness over the loss, and the kind of despair over the loss.
Yeah, I suppose we don't really think about all the numbers we saved. We think about the people we lost, or could we have thrown an extra life jacket this way or that way? Could it have saved this person or that person? We don't know, but that's what we think about at the end of the day.
And you're watching it as a viewer at home and you're thinking, God, what you have done. Yeah. But obviously you're seeing it from a different perspective.
Well, that's it, exactly. No matter how many people you save, if you lose one, you dwell on that, and that's the mission's a failure then. Or the day you feel like it's a failure. It's not really.
Watching you going out, and the difference between, I suppose, the ribs which are the rubber inflatable, and the barges. And you go out to the ribs on a rib.
Yes.
And then with the barge, it's a different kind of approach, or it's certainly what was on...
With the barges, we tended to try and take a number of people off the top deck, because the higher a ship is, and the more weight that's higher up, it's more unstable. That's what happened with the picture.
There were 800 people in the barge.
Exactly.
And as Tony was saying, 400 of them were locked in downstairs.
Yeah. So what we tried to do was empty the top deck, leave those people underneath. I know it was terrible, but at the same time it was the safest thing to do. So we cleared the top deck, and then what we did with our 2 ribs was push the barge up against the side of the ship and keep it there, and we dropped a ladder onto the top of the barge, and then we jumped out of the ribs, we stayed on top of the barges, and we safely directed people up the ladders. It was a much safer way of doing it than transporting, because at some stages then the barge is left unattended. So if we leave the barge, anytime they see the ribs driving away from the barge, they panic and they think we're not coming back, no matter how many times you're coming back and go.
Yeah.
So the safest thing for the barges were to get them up alongside the ship, and then it's much safer that way.
It was like watching, you just thought these people were never going to stop coming out.
Yeah.
It was, and
It felt like that because like Ian was on the boat, Trish was to the right doing the search party, and I was standing right as they were coming up for the medical attendance, and like it was just, even we're looking at the numbers, they had wristbands after they got searched, they got photographed and banded, so you had a count of how many you had on board and how many you left with and got to Italy with. But our numbers went alphabetically, and you normally went A, B, C, 1 to 100 and then stopped. But this was A, B, C, D, E, F. You were going into, you knew at that stage you were above 600, and then it became to a stage was our ship itself unstable because the amount, same as the barge will be unstable, we're now unstable because the sheer numbers, but obviously you cannot stop taking them, so.
you have to just figure how to work
That's
that.
it,
Yeah. It's a chain of command, very important in situations like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. Like, we train and we have a structure, but when you're out there and you're halfway through your 600-700 people, that's when I think rank kind of just goes out the window a bit, and you try and just pull together to try and get through everyone, because you don't stop until everyone's on board. And like the heat, and you're trying to get everyone on board safely, you're searching them, and it's a process, it's a one-by-one process. So you are there for hours and hours endlessly, and you think, Jesus, am I ever going to get through this? Like I did 700-800 squats one day trying to search people on a lighter note, and I was like, I'm going to have a bum like J-Lo here at the end of it. Like,
And as to that with the Irish Navy.
But yeah, that's when I think, look, I'm a petty officer, ABs, whatever. Like, I was in charge of the search team, and at the end of the day, I was trying to look after my people, they were trying to look after me, we were trying to make sure we're rehydrated, because if we're not good to go, we're not able to help people at the end of the day. Like, so
We're not good to them,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, like, rank is extremely important, but just during those really, really tough times, you kind of forget, and you kind of just put your hand on the next person's back and say, come on, we can do this, we can finish. Like,
When you're searching them, what are you looking for?
basically anything that is going to be a danger to you, your crew members, or themselves, or other refugees, you know. I came across nails and kind of blades, and not too much, nothing too much that's too dangerous, but at the end of the day, it can cause danger to someone, and especially to your own crew. And if you let something pass and something happens, you never forgive yourself. But generally what we did find is mostly people just carried on their worldly possessions, and to them that was like photographs, family albums, mostly pictures, drawings their daughters would have made, maybe some family heirlooms like a bit of jewellery or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
Basically, that was the most, and they had food and clothes, and sure, everything was soaked, everything was either covered in petrol, to be honest, covered in their own feces mostly.
Yeah, the bottle of urine, the urine thing downstairs and below the barge.
They were lucky if they had bottles.
That's mild, to be honest. Yeah, because like we were trying to do our best to keep their dignity intact, but at the same time, we had masks on, but the smells were coming through the mask, and the smells were horrific. Like, we used to put Vicks inside our masks, so it would help us a little bit, but after a couple of hours, that wear off, and you can actually get an awful, awful smell off them. And they're coming on, and they're shy, and they know they're in a state, and you're just trying to say, you're fine, and not show what you're going through. In a way, because there's men coming on, they're half naked. It's after being stripped off them, and you're just trying to keep their dignity intact as much as you can, you know.
And they're coming on with scabies and things like that. Some people aren't they, because of the conditions.
And they might not have left with scabies, but they might have it now because there's 200 of them being stuck in a rubber raft together, and it's highly contagious. And not to mention, like, hygiene isn't the highest, obviously. They've been kept in a camper on a beach for a couple of days before they left. And then in a rubber raft, and like I said, like, we tried to originally, we were thinking of separating the scabies from infected from non-infected, but then you just quickly come to learn that, well, you can't separate the families, and the chances are when you go above the 600 number, they're all going to be sitting beside each other anyway. So it makes absolutely no difference. So you're better off just leaving them with their own groups, because they're very, like, cliquish. They tend to come on, like, if they know someone from their village or from their town or city or whatever, or from the camp they were in, they tend to stick together and stuff. So you're better off just leaving them together.
And I know we were talking to Tony during the week, and one of the kind of things that we maybe don't think about, Irish, English, French, whatever, but there's all these other kind of tribal, and because people are coming from so many different countries, and they're coming through Libya, and there are so many different backgrounds there. Was that difficult, or was it kind of, were people so exhausted by the time they got on that they, you know, any difficulties that might have between different groups?
Initially, you'd have, everyone was just relieved. They come on, we give them food, water. We had special, like, almost energy bars, just to give the initial boost, and carbohydrates, fluids. They could see by the medic, get treatment. They'd get a blanket, they'd lie down, they're covered, they're in the shade, and they'd rest. And then after a couple of hours, when they're unsettled because they're not used to being on a boat, they're not used to being, they were expecting to be rescued, and when they were put in their boat, or rubber boats originally, they were told Italy's only a couple of hours away, when realistically Italy's 2-3 days steam, so they didn't expect to be on the ship for that long, and then they start to get a little bit anxious and agitated, and that becomes more prevalent. But for the first couple of hours, no, but then you start to see religious divides, cultural divides, everything.
Right, and that, you have to kind of just, I suppose, try and keep that calm without demeaning anybody, or...
Yeah, well, like, we can't differentiate, like, who's what, like, between the Muslims and the Christians. The Muslims think they're hierarchy than the Christians, and I came across that on the after deck when I was on watch. There was women, and they were grabbing other women's babies and using them as pillows. They were horrendous to each other. And we can't look at, like, religious or cultures. We have to look at everyone's a human being here. And I suppose what we try to do is try to keep the groups a little bit separate. Like, but they do it. It's a small ship at the end of the day.
And you have to keep the ship safe.
Absolutely. You have to keep everyone around them safe, and your own crew safe at the end of the day. So, look, we did come across people that didn't get on. We tried to separate them. If there was issues, I suppose the worst we did was maybe just bring them to a certain area and cable tie them to that area so that they can't wander. Just leave them there for half an hour or whatever till they get their thoughts together and back again. But that would have been the worst, really, that I would have come across.
Right, you know? Yeah. And I suppose after being through everything,
you're just looking. You're like, as I said, like, that woman's baby was hurt. Like, you're trying to keep everyone safe.
Yeah.
So if someone is acting up a little bit, you do have to try and segregate them a little bit, you know.
And going to Italy, was Italy because you were working with Italy for so long, or you were part of the Italian?
Well, the setup down there was that we had a note for ballet, which is a diplomatic note with the Italian authorities. There was a team went out in advance of the first deployment to negotiate that with Foreign Affairs and the Italian Ministry of the Interior. And then that note for ballet effectively stated that anyone we rescued would be brought to Italy. So that was the arrangement that they'd be brought there. So what would happen is that the ship would come to the quay wall. We'd have been told what port to go to, so it wasn't always the same port, and that's why you could have them on board for 24, 48 hours, maybe slightly longer, depending on where you were told to bring them. So it could be somewhere in Sicily, or it could you may have to go through the Straits of Messina, just between Sicily and Italy, and there's 1 or 2 ports up there, just on the western side of Italy we'd have to go to, and then you'd arrive in a port, and effectively there'd be the Italian Ministry for the Interior would be there, there'd be the Red Cross be there, there'd be some other NGOs there, and the Italian police, or the variations of it, because it's just kind of quite complicated over there, and you effectively would disembark the people there, you know, and then we'd literally scrub the ship down and back out again.
Off you go again.
Yeah, because normally our cycle was we'd be on operations for maybe 12, 14 days. We'd go in somewhere for 4 days for R&R and for resupplying fuel, etc. And then we go back out again. So for that 12 or 14 days, you were either on station or you were going to Italy, or you were returning. So you weren't hanging around after you disembarked them.
Right. And of course it's stopped now because policy has changed.
Yeah, well, effectively, I mean, as I said, we transitioned at the end of 2017, we transitioned into EU NAV4 Med, but there is no EU NAV4 Med at sea mission at the moment. It's all aerial reconnaissance and capacity building from the Libyan Coast Guard.
And trying to kind of keep them in Libya, isn't it? Or stop them?
Well, effectively from a capacity point of view, like the Libyan Coast Guard, where the EU are trying to build up their capacity to be able to deal with this themselves, you know.
Right. Now, there was a meeting in France last week, and Ireland has signed up to kind of agree to take people again, and that, you know, that they're trying to, I think, maybe revisit the whole way they're dealing with this in some shape or form. So if you were sent again, I mean, I know you're naval people, so you do kind of, you carry out the state's instructions or whatever. But I mean, how would you feel about going again if you were asked to go again?
Yeah, I mean, personally, if I were asked to go again, I would. My wife is in the audience there, and she's saying, "God, no." But personally, I would go again. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've been in the naval service 29 years, and I've enjoyed it all. But that particular 3 months for me down there was the most fulfilling time I've had in the naval service. I got the most from it. So I'd love to go down there again, but my wife always laughs at me when I put my hand up for these kind of things.
And you, with small babies now, the two of you, how would you?
I'd like to, but not a chance. It's so rewarding, though. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done, probably. Going back down now with the baby, and we're trying to build a house at the minute, though. It wouldn't be great now, maybe in a couple of years, though. You know?
Right.
As much as I'd like to say I would love to go back down again, and I would if my situation was different, but I have just had a baby, and I think I would find 3 months extremely hard to be away from him. But my wife is in the audience as well, like, so she said she wouldn't mind maybe when he's a bit older, like, and sure,
when you'd be kind of more ready to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I'll be honest, I loved work, and I don't think many people get such an opportunity like we do to help in that kind of capacity, and it is very fulfilling, very rewarding.
Right. And what about you?
Yeah, I'd love to go again, but same situation. I don't think.
You're all being manacled, are you?
Yeah, well, I'm not even a year married yet, so I don't think I'll be let go yet.
And I'm going to throw it to the floor after this, but I suppose the last, was it difficult coming back into families? And maybe it's your partners I should be asking this question to. But was it difficult making the transition after
I know
all that experience?
my partner Danielle, she's in the audience down there, she'd tell you that I came back a totally different person from my time in the Med. I spent every day out on the boats. I wasn't doing on the deck like the rest. So I would be on the front line. I would have seen an awful lot of terrible things. There was times we were stacking bodies on top of each other in the boat. So it does get quite, it does get hard. Danielle would say that, yeah, I did change over there, but I'd like to think I'm going to get back to it now. Getting back to normal now.
Yeah.
You do become a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more
appreciative.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even watching it would make you more appreciative, never mind living it. It's phenomenal. It's horrendous, and there's no words really that can describe what you have done.
I think maybe to put the homecoming or maybe the whole mental health side in context, I suppose there's a couple of things that are important, because we get asked that a lot, we get asked how we cope and stuff. I suppose the very first thing to remember is that it's all from a voluntary basis. I mean, none of us had to go there. That's the first thing. So I suppose from that point of view, it's a positive thing that we wanted to go. Prior to deployment, we have a whole series of briefings. I mean, even though Sean said nothing prepares you for it, there are certain things you can do to a degree, insofar as you certainly get a lot of briefings before you go of what you may experience. We have personal support team that fly out to the ship halfway through our deployments, like they do with army units halfway through their deployments, just to see how people are getting on. And if there is a crisis situation, as we had to with ships in general, that team would fly out to that ship within 48 hours to talk to them, to help them decompress. And a bit what Trish said about, just sitting down and chatting to people. It's not like psychoanalysts. We're not there in front of a room and, there has to be something wrong with you. You have to tell me. It's literally down to sitting down with people, having cups of tea with them. And then on our return, our personal support team would fly out. So the journey for the ship, those journeys from the Mediterranean back home, would have been anything from sort of final journey would have been 5 to 7 days. So a personal support services team would be there, and they'd talk to you about how you are, give you briefings on what life is going to be like at home, because you could be facing anything going home. You could be facing a wonderful homecoming, or you could be facing a child that's dying of the flu, and your wife or partner or your husband isn't delighted that you've been away the last 3 months in general. We were very lucky. Our one, Trish and I, we got back on the 17th of December, so we effectively came home for Christmas. So the ship brought everyone home for Christmas, and there was people saying, all I want for Christmas is my daddy or my mummy or my brother or my sister.
So kind of fairy tale stuff in that.
Sort of, but it isn't like that all the time, and people come home, we're all individuals, and 57 people coming home are coming home to 57 different situations. It's not the same for everyone, but effectively, you have people who've been in a ship together, and I think there's a lot of really strong bonds made. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that kind of puts it in some context from that point of view, because that's obviously very important,
I mean, it's amazing. I could keep asking questions forever, but I won't, because I know there are lots of people who probably have questions out there, and if you do, just fire them, and we'll go through the main man and see how it works.
Go through the chair first of all. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a mic. Excellent.
I was wondering, I'm actually from Australia, I don't know if you can tell. I'm not so familiar with the operations in this area, and I was wondering if you know sort of what's filled the gap. As you said, the Irish Navy transitioned into this other mission or whatever, and no one's actually been deployed on that mission navally at the moment, and it's a different mission anyway, so who's kind of picking up these people, and whether or not there is anybody on a similar mission at the moment, does that play on your mind? Like, do you think about that a lot now that you're home, like sort of what's happening to these people? Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I'll field this one. So what's filled the gap down there? Effectively, there's no military mission down below in the Mediterranean. There's no military maritime mission. There is aerial reconnaissance, so that's carrying on. But from an actual rescuing point of view, and I suppose that depends on how you define rescuing, but we won't get into that. You effectively have two groupings of people. You have the NGOs down there, so the likes of Médecins Sans Frontières, Open Arms, a number of...
German ship who...
Yeah, the Alan Kurd, there's a number of NGOs down there. And then you also have the Libyan Coast Guard are involved in that as well. The Italians around Lampedusa would have some work there. And then in Malta as well, the armed forces of Malta are filling that gap as well. I suppose, to answer your second part, or to not answer it, I suppose really sometimes you think about it, sometimes you don't, you know. It's just you're there for a period of time, but you have to kind of detract yourself from it a wee bit as well, you know. And effectively that's something for the EU to think about more than anybody else, really. Hope that answers your question.
I suppose it's more difficult for the NGOs because they don't have wouldn't have the same legal rights or legal recognition coming into Italy or places like that.
And they have their own problems down there at the moment. You know, there's a change of government in Italy, and they're finding it very challenging to land people.
And I suppose as well, and I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth, because of EU policy and because of working with the Libyan government such as it is, the numbers of people coming have reduced. They're still coming, they're still dying. I mean, I suppose they've disappeared off the headlines until something happens, like happened this week when so many people drowned just off Libya. But I certainly wouldn't want to be taking my chances if I were going back to Libya. I don't think it sounds like a place you'd want to be.
No.
Anyone else?
Thank you. I'm wondering what department in Ireland made the decision to, first of all, stop that mission, but also to participate in the policy that people would be sent back to Libya. Libya, it is well known and it is very well documented that people who are in Libya, who have come from different countries to seek their way to Europe, are absolutely held in torturous, inhumane conditions. Women are raped. There's strip searches all the time. People are kept in for 19, 20 hours every day. There's inadequate food, etc., etc. So it is, I think, an awful decision to have been made. And I'm just wondering who made it, and, you know, is there any conscience, if you like, attached to it? Because it is a very bad decision.
I think I better field that question again as well.
That's fine.
Getting into political things as well, I suppose what you have to understand is that I obviously don't comment on government policy, nor would it be appropriate for me to comment on government policy. But I suppose, you know, the reality is that we in the Defence Forces work for the Department of Defence, and the Department of Defence ultimately works for the government. But there is no maritime mission to go down to. So I suppose that may be one of them. As regards the conscious, I can't talk for other people, obviously. And as regards what's happening down there, yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's a lot of open source information, and all the things you've said absolutely are true. If you go up online in the UN websites, you'll find all that information.
Yeah, but again, you can't comment because that's not your job.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? We can ask the questions. You may not get answers, but if you...
You might like the answer you get, but I'll certainly answer them.
Yeah, yeah. Woman there.
Hi. I just wanted to ask if you think they are actually having success in combating the traffickers in the first place. Because there is, like, I just read this article about the argument of it's almost causing a cyclical thing that we are rescuing, as traffickers are using that then as almost another selling point to pack these boats full of people and just send them out to their peril and possible death.
I think maybe the way to answer that is to rephrase the question a small bit. Yeah. And maybe if we talk about migration in general. As I was sitting in the hotel room today, getting ready to come here this evening, I was flicking through the news, and there was a documentary on people that they're called the Angels, the Something Angels. They walk the route from Mexico to America, where people move, and they drop bottles of water for people there to pick up the people who are moving. And I suppose it's a reflection on the fact that migration is not a phenomenon that's particular to the Mediterranean. Migration is a phenomenon that is global, and it has been going on for centuries. And I think people will continue to migrate globally for as long as there is for them something that they don't have at home. And perhaps maybe it's a good time to talk about how you kind of reconcile what we did. And certainly from my point of view, the day I was able to reconcile what was going on was I was with Trish down there, and it was the very first rubber boat we came across, and conditions were very bad. And I would consider myself to be a professional mariner. At that stage, I had 25 years in the Navy, second ship I was in command of. So I would have thought I have a fair idea what's going on at sea. And I looked at that boat, and I could not for a second understand why anybody would get into it. They'd no life jackets, they'd no flares, they'd no first aid equipment, they had nothing. And it's only then that you realize the reason people migrate, not just there, but globally, is because whilst they are aware of the horrors that may confront them, or sometimes it might be fine, but it could be unpleasant, that their life at home is so bad. Now, yes, I understand there are migrant workers that move, but we'll just park that for a while and deal with people, human beings like the rest of us in the room today, who obviously feel that their life is so bad that no matter what happens to me, and the lady a second ago who described it very eloquently, what happens to them, that all of that is worth it. Okay, so it doesn't matter what happens to me, it's worth it. And so long as life is like that, people are going to continue to migrate.
It was quite one of the interesting things in the documentary was the getting rid of the boats and the burning the raft and the sinking the barge because they're so valuable to the traffickers.
They'll just recycle them.
Yeah. And then one of the awful things, and really, really awful, was the ones you came across off radar that just appeared.
Out of nowhere, yeah.
And they had no phone, they had no anything to make contact with anybody. They were stuck in a raft in the middle.
Some of them had run out of fuel as well. So if you hadn't have came across them in the relatively good condition that they were in, considering their situation, you might have come across them a couple of days later in a much more unfortunate situation. And I mean, just not to answer any question like that, not to go into politics or anything like that, but for a question like that, like, how do you justify that kind of question? To me, it's just the moment you rescue the first person. I mean, one life is worth justifying any kind of going down there, putting the politics and putting everything else aside. At the end of the day, the base story is you're saving people's lives, so that's justification in itself.
Yeah. I mean, the trafficking is just something else, but the idea that you can intervene in some shape or form.
And it's also, it's a combination of not just addressing the symptoms, it's a combination of a whole series of things. You know, you've got to rescue people at sea, you've got to prevent them, the interface between land and the sea, you've got to sort of prevent them from moving out that particular route, and then you've got to address what's going on in their home country.
Yeah. Have any of you, and if the answer is no, I want to go back to have any of you had contact with any people that you rescued? No. Okay. Can I ask Tony and if there's any other questions before, and because I just think that's an amazing story. So if we take another couple of questions, and Katrina, you can tell me when to.
I've got that.
Yeah, okay. Right.
So the new Italian government, the far-right aspect of it came in a really strong...
Sorry, what government?
Italian.
Okay.
I'm from New Zealand. It's like the other entity. So there's a lot of...
You know each other, no?
She's my sister.
That part of the globe, it should be fine. You should know each other.
So the new Italian government has a really strong far-right anti-migration sense to it. So I'm not going to ask you a question about the politics of that. What I am going to ask you, though, is when you get to Italy and you're disembarking people, do you feel resentment from Italian people that you're bringing the migrants to? Are they resenting that the migrants are coming? Are you treated poorly because you're seen as contributing to a problem? Or is that a different reality on the ground when you're actually bringing people in need to these shores?
I think certainly our experience, like we can't talk for anybody post our time there, but from our time, the Italian government hadn't changed at that time. So their policy was still to welcome them. I mean, I certainly didn't see any resentment. I don't know if you guys did.
I didn't see much resentment. I did see a couple of problems with the bodies, the T4s that we were bringing to shore. A lot of the time, the local authorities wouldn't let them, so we'd have to, there was one night where we pulled into Sicily, I think it was, we had to unload 15 bodies, but they wouldn't let any one of those bodies touch the soil, touch the Italian soil, so they had to just go straight off the ship onto the gangway and into a van. I don't know what the reason behind it was. I just found it crazy.
You know, it's more political. They don't want to claim, I suppose, responsibility for the casualties, because then they have to record them and bury them and everything else. So they tend to let someone else take responsibility for the casualties. That's one problem we had when we're tasked to a specific vessel or a specific platform or anything that was in distress, and we recovered casualties or T4 casualties, dead bodies. It was different because we were tasked to and we had a port set to go to. But if there was rafts and stuff that we stumbled upon, we tend to find it more difficult to find a port because the Italians weren't expecting it and it wasn't in the plan, and you were kind of sitting waiting to see what would happen with the. And then of course you have the loved ones who have been escorted off because they have to go for medical treatment, go to their different refugee camps for asylum. They're not allowed to wait with their loved ones. They don't know what's happened to them. It kind of gets a bit. That kind of weighs in your mind a bit about what happens to them, but.
And there was a situation then with the one body that we found just floating around on its own in the sea in the middle of nowhere, with no rescues that had happened anywhere near it. So obviously the commander of the ship contacted Italy, they contacted Malta, they contacted various other countries, and no country would accept it. So we actually had to stand off that body floating around the water for about 4 hours. And eventually when we did recover it, it was Malta, I think, that decided to take it, but it was a fight to get them to take it.
Because it was in international waters, so it's really, and it was on its own. It wasn't connected to a specific rescue, so they couldn't put it in with a group. Yeah. So it was just a matter of trying to figure out who would accept it.
There was no point in us taking it on board because we were staying out for a while. We would have just been rotting on the boat.
I think as well, just to answer your question, at the time the Italian government were offering grants to any villages or towns that would accept the migrants. So the Italians were actually very happy to accept them, and I think they were very welcoming at the time. There was buses waiting for them, and there was clothes and all that crack waiting for them. So at our time anyway, there was no resentment at all.
I know when we came ashore first, we noticed that they had footwear. They were sizing them up, measuring them for clothes. They were getting everything ready before they went to the refugee camp so that they'd be waiting for them, so that the correct clothing, correct utilities, the basic stuff, be ready for them. And you have to remember, none of that's free. So the European Union or whoever was in charge of the mission was paying for all that. So that's an increase to the economy and smaller businesses and factories in the areas that the migrants were going to. So it's a monetary boost to the economy as well as labour and everything else when they eventually get their statuses and stuff. So it's they weren't resentful to them because they were bringing something to the country. They weren't just coming in and taking everything. They're actually bringing more to the country than they were taking out of it.
That's something we don't actually often hear about, really. So is anybody else? One more.
Could I ask what the naval service has learned from all this, and in particular, given the sort of problems we're likely to be faced with global warming and major movements of population, are there lessons for the defence forces and what we might be called upon to deal with?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think from our perspective, what you have to remember is that from our own domestic operations, we're very used to launching boats. We're very used to going over to other vessels. We're very used to doing ship protection operations. We're very used to looking at, for instance, non-combatant evacuation exercises of our own citizens, like planning for them for various countries. But our time in the Mediterranean was actually an opportunity to put all those things together. So to be able to launch boats in a potentially hostile environment 12 miles off the Libyan coast when you have no idea what was around you in the battle space. When you were in a situation where you were deploying ribs out with divers, where you were bringing mass numbers of people on board your ship. So from that point of view, it provides an opportunity for us to to really kind of codify and solidify and ensure that from a capability point of view, we were as capable as everybody else. And then when we transitioned into EU NAV4 Med, we were effectively working alongside very large capital ships, you know, frigates, destroyers, ships with much larger crews, with greater technology, weapon systems. However, we were able, I mean, other than the fact that we had no helicopters, obviously, we were able to carry out the operations of capital ships, albeit with a much smaller crew, and effectively prove to ourselves that we are in a position to work alongside other navies that people may feel would be far more advanced than our own. So from that point of view, very good. From an equipment point of view, we've learned an awful lot about the equipment we use and maybe where we need to go with that. Weapon systems on board, we've learned a lot about that. Comms gear, etc. From an interoperability point of view, we've learned a lot about our own capability and where it's going, and those kind of things are being used to feed into our own equipment replacement, gear replacement, upgrades, refits, and ultimately next generation ships.
My commander, Katrina Crew. Can I take one last question? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mine is not necessarily a question. I'll be very quick. I live in France at the moment, and my partner is very much so involved on the front lines with migrants and asylum seekers. So I've always had my eyes open to the realities of what these people face. And I was very happy to come across the documentary. And I just wanted to say how proud I was to see the tricolour flying over the Mediterranean, and just to thank you all for what you've done.
Well, we can all second that. Thank you. It has been an absolute privilege. Thank you so much for your time and for what you've done. It's just been lovely, and thank you for coming to Galway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fintan O'Toole said in 2016 that the only two institutions that the Irish trust were the army and the arts. And that may well be true. We are very lucky to have a fantastic Army, Navy and Air Corps in this country. And tonight we had the privilege, an unusual one, because we don't often get the opportunity to hear people who are operating on the front line tell us about their experiences. As you can see, they are incredibly professional. They're deeply humanitarian. And of course, Tony Geraghty, if he ever gets fed up being a naval officer, has a huge career ahead of him as a diplomat. The way that he managed to negotiate political questions that he cannot answer was a masterclass for the Department of Foreign Affairs. So again, can I thank Sean Doyle, Tony Geraghty, Tricia Sullivan, Ian Trimble, and our wonderful moderator, Judy Murphy. Thank you.